This past week, I've been playing demos for a number of different roguelites as part of Steam Next Fest. Here are my first impressions for 17 demos that I've played, both the good ones and the bad ones. So let's get into it. Up first, Domekeeper is a roguelite with a fairly simple but well executed concept of mining and base defense. The core gameplay loop involves going into a mine to search for and collect various resources. You then use these resources to upgrade your base, character traits, and defensive capabilities. At regular intervals, your above-ground base is attacked by aliens. You have to return to your base in order to defend it using a laser cannon. So altogether, you mine, bring back resources, and fight against monsters. The game has a lot of nice touches here and there that add some depth to the game, like how carrying resources slows you down, and the game has a surprising amount of enemy variety. The gameplay loop was also relaxing in a very pleasant way, and there are relics you can find along the way that add a nice twist to the game. For example, there's a teleporter relic that let you get in and out of the deep mine a lot faster. My main worry with this game is the long-term replayability. While I enjoyed my time with the demo, the core gameplay loop is still fairly straightforward. So we'll need some more twists and mechanics in order to keep it engaging in the long term. I know some more additions are planned to this game in the form of various classes, different weapons for your base, but we'll see if that's enough for the long term. I also couldn't tell if there was a win condition for this game, aka a way to successfully complete a run, or if the goal is just to last as long as possible. I'll say this a couple times in this video, but I generally prefer roguelites that have a win condition, like a final boss or something like that, over ones that just ask you to survive as long as you can. So I think Domekeeper could be fleshed out into a fun roguelite, but I still have a couple concerns. Because of that, this game is definitely on my wish list, and I'm going to keep an eye on it as development continues, but I'm not 100% sold yet. Curse to Golf is a unique roguelite that centers around, as the name suggests, golfing. You're stuck in golf purgatory, and your only solution is to golf your way out of it. The game itself takes the form of a 2D platformer type of game, where you use different clubs, power up, and spin in order to complete 18 holes and escape. If you've run out of shots on any given hole, you have to start your run all over. The gameplay starts out pretty straightforward, with a couple clicks allowing you to aim and power up your shot, but there are two main extra twists that really elevate the game. First, you can activate ace cards either before taking a shot or during a shot to allow for new strategy and fun action. For example, one ace card lets you re-aim your shot mid-air. Second, you can make your golf ball spin, which changes its direction after each bounce. And that gives you more control over your shot and allows you to correct poor aim to some degree. Together, the ace cards and the spin made the game a lot more engaging than just taking a shot and watching it go. You can stay actively involved in the game for a lot more of it. In terms of negatives, I really didn't like how navigating the overworld worked. It's a fairly straightforward, Slay the Spire-like overworld, but you have to manually navigate it with your golf cart in a way that felt awkward to me. You had to navigate with your keyboard, but you also had to click on things with your mouse. It was a weird hybrid. I also had a couple moments where I took one bad shot and got awkwardly stuck in a corner, which basically ended an otherwise very successful run. But those are more nitpicky complaints about my time playing through it. As a whole, I didn't expect to like this game as much as I did, because I don't usually enjoy sports games that much. But this game really stuck with me. In some ways, it's more of a puzzle game than a traditional sports game. After playing all the demos, this is one of the main ones that I really want to try in its finished state. Because of that, I plan to buy this game and play it more on release. Nitro Kid is a fun mix of turn-based tactical game and deck builder card game roguelite. The combat takes place in a standard grid-based map, but all of your moves and attacks are decided by the cards that you play. You clear rooms of enemies, or at least kill enough enemies to progress, collect cards to flesh out your deck between fights, and try to find unique synergies and fun combos. I think the game has a similar structure to fights in tight places, but I haven't played that game myself. As a whole, I had fun playing through Nitro Kid. I liked the mix of important positioning and card game mechanics. I did a couple runs, and the different decks had a nicely different feel to them. Nitro Kid also has a lot of the smaller details well. For example, it's easy to access information about enemy abilities and attacks to be able to strategize and plan around those. I did have a problem though, where one of the mini bosses basically just hard countered one of the decks I was running, and I'm not sure if that was a game balance problem or just a me being a noob problem. I also worry that positioning in this game is less impactful, less important than it should be, which would be a shame because that positioning quality, the grid structure, is the main differentiating factor of Nitro Kid versus a more standard card game roguelite. For example, whenever you moved, enemies almost always just auto-targeted you instantly, And similarly, a lot of your attacks would basically hit every enemy anyways, so movement just didn't feel as important as it should have. Still, because I had fun playing through this demo, I added Nitro Kid to my wish list, and I'm excited to see what comes for this game in the future. Like Domekeeper, I'm not 100% sold yet, but there's a good chance that I pick up this game at some point in the future when it fully releases. Next, Call to the Lamb is an action roguelite with a lovable art style juxtaposed with the sinister story and theme. In exchange for your life, your goal is to build up a cult in support of a fallen or trapped deity. This feels like a game that will have significant cross-run progression and resource management across runs. It also probably will have a more mission-style structure, or at least several different areas or dungeons to clear, similar to games like Children of Morta or Moonlighter. In terms of combat, the game is a relatively simple action roguelite core gameplay where you have a weapon, a spell or special ability, and a dodge roll. However, the gameplay feels clean and responsive. The spells are satisfying to use, the enemies have good indicators before they attack, and randomized modifiers, or tarot cards, that I found in the demo felt like they'd be fun to build craft with. Really, the game just felt good to play through. I think this game has really high potential. Obviously, there were of course some negatives. For example, when you enter a room, enemies attack really quickly, which led to me not having enough time to react and taking some damage. Also, all the weapons that I used so far in the demo had a pretty similar and simple attack pattern, just a broad swinging motion. But still, I've already decided that I want to play more of this game, and I plan to buy this game when it releases. I played Beneath Oresa next, which is in some ways a fairly standard roguelite card game, but it mixes in cinematic slow motion combat when you queue up attack cards. And that gives it a more active feel than your usual standard card game roguelite. It also brings a couple other different mechanics, such as being able to choose a second character, which gives you new cards and passive effects for your run. Between fights, the standard deck builder mechanics, relics, and random events still exist. In terms of core combat, I think Beneath Oresa functions well. The look of the combat set it apart from other deck builders, and small mechanics here and there were well done, made me enjoy my time with the game. For example, there were mini random events before most fights where you could choose modifiers or conditions that would have a small to medium-sized impact on the fight, like giving your enemy more health in exchange for some buff or power-up to your character. This game had a fatal flaw though, which was an information and UI problem. Lots of cards would give a debuff to enemies or buff your hero, but hovering over cards wouldn't tell you what the effect actually did. And that made planning moves and synergies a lot harder to do. For example, the deck you used for the demo relies on comboing Smite, but the card didn't say what Smite was. I didn't realize for a while the Smite was actually an additional attack card being placed in my hand because I was looking for a buff being applied to my character and I couldn't find it. So I think Beneath Oresa has some cool ideas and takes on the card game roguelite genre. And because of that, I tentatively wishlisted this game. But I will not play this game again unless that information and UI problem is fixed. And I can more easily tell what the effects on the cards actually do. Because without that, it would just be too cumbersome for making fun combos and synergies. Lone Ruin is an isometric action roguelite where you start with a dodge roll and one attack ability. And you try to survive as long as you can. Similar to Vampire Survivor-like games, enemies drop experience, and once you collect enough of it, you can level up and unlock modifiers for existing skills. For example, decrease cooldown for your dash, or making your lightning strike ability hold more charges before needing to reload. You can also unlock new abilities for your character and add them to your loadout, and you can also heal yourself if need be. The gameplay itself was nice enough as a standard action roguelite, and everything felt responsive. I also quite liked the art style of the game, and there was pretty decent enemy variety, so gameplay-wise, Lone Ruin felt fine. But at the same time, nothing gameplay-wise really grabbed my attention, nothing really held me. But more importantly, I just didn't find the survival game mode to be that engaging. As I said before, the last as long as you can game modes are just not my personal preference compared to game modes that have a win condition or final boss or something along those lines. I did not wishlist this game because I need to see something more than just a survival game mode. I would really only consider playing this game again if the other game modes had something novel that really caught my eye. That being said, this game does mix the incredibly popular Vampire Survivor game elements with a more standard action roguelite, so maybe that's something that appeals to you more than it does to me. Next, let's talk about Isles of Arrow, which is a unique tower defense roguelite. Like regular tower defense games, you place towers to defend against waves of enemies that walk down a defined path. But in Isles of Arrows, you also create the path that enemies attack down, as well as other miscellaneous buildings. You're given one tile or building to place each turn for free, You can use gold you get from killing enemies and clearing waves to place even more. I had some fun playing Rogue Tower recently, so I was excited to try another take on a tower defense roguelite. And there are a number of things I quite liked about Isles of Arrows. Namely, I liked the way you created the path for enemies based on randomized tiles that you got during each run. And I liked the grid system and the flexibility and limitations for placing things. Unfortunately, I think this game was really held back by various flaws and annoyances. Most importantly, you can only place a new tower or path tile if you've created the grid, the tile itself, using a flag. Basically, placing flags create tiles around the flag, and you use those tiles to place buildings and path tiles. But the balance of flag buildings versus other things felt off, and I felt like I never had enough room to actually place things. Maybe this is a simple fix of just making flags come up more often, or maybe I played the game poorly, but I just felt gridlocked and unable to place buildings and tiles so often that it ruined the fun for me. Additionally, there were small awkward qualities placing towers and tiles that could be improved upon with better keyboard shortcuts. There were also no targeting options for towers, no tower attack damage info, and several other small things that just made the game harder to get into. So we'll see what happens with this game in the future. I actually did add this game to my wishlist just because I really hope this game fixes a lot of these issues. I like the underlying ideas and systems, but there are a number of improvements that I would need to see before I played this game again, before I bought it in the future. We Who Are About to Die is a hardcore action roguelite where you play as a gladiator fighting for glory. This game is immediately set apart from other isometric roguelites due to its complex combat system. Instead of just pressing an attack or block button, you have to pull back your weapon and then swing, and you have to block in a particular direction. Basically, the game takes that standard melee combat and gives you more control, which in turn makes it a lot harder because you have to be more deliberate in order to actually hit enemies and block their attacks. I think the idea for this game is cool, and it definitely felt unique while playing through it because the control scheme was so different than other roguelites that I played. But I just don't think that this game is a game for me. The complex controls make controller support unavailable, and it was just hard to get a hang of the basics, like blocking, because it required such deliberate actions. In order to block, you have to hover over enemies, and then click and drag in the right direction, and then quickly go back to hovering over the enemies to click and drag again to block their next attack. It just felt clunky to me. I think this game could have a very dedicated fan base because that more complex physics engine and that increased control the game gives you allows for a lot of mastery. But for me, I felt like I would have to put hours into this game before I even started having fun, and I just don't want to do that. So for that reason, this game is off my list. Next, Ragtag Crew is a straightforward turn-based RPG roguelite where you control a team of 3 characters of different classes. Each character has a basic attack, a core, most important ability, and 2 to 4 additional abilities. In a standard turn-based fashion, each of your characters performs one action, ability, or attack, and then all the enemies do the same. Between fights, the game uses a fairly standard Slay the Spire-like overworld where you encounter random events, collect more abilities for your team, etc. But there's also an added resource management element in order to heal and feed your team. As a whole, I liked my playthroughs of the Ragtag Crew demo. I liked the idea of each character having a core ability that resets the cooldown for their other abilities. And I liked how the other abilities and basic attacks were structured. I also liked small elements here and there, like the dialogue options changing based on your team members, who you had on your team, and I liked how some fights had random challenges that you could complete for extra rewards. There were, of course, some things I didn't like though. The game felt a little slow to me, even for a turn-based game, and I think maybe some more keyboard hotkeys could improve this. I was also really bad at this game, and I'm not sure if that's a balancing thing or just a me problem due to a lack of knowledge or skill on my part. I also didn't like how most skills had a 5% mischance for seemingly no other reason than RNG frustration. But I did still wishlist Ragtag Crew. I'm curious to see what comes to this game since I had fun with it during the demo, but it's also not topping the list of games I'm excited for. This game, Vertical Kingdom, was a pleasant surprise for me. It's a card game, city builder hybrid where you use cards to place buildings. The buildings work in a standard city builder way, with some giving you more workers, some giving you more resources, etc. The placement of your buildings is incredibly important due to limited space, bonuses for placing certain buildings together, and the unique verticality of the game, where some buildings can be placed on top of others, creating walls or towers of buildings. I didn't expect to like this game that much, and I actually didn't like it when I first started playing it. I had problems reading some text because of the text size and the stylized font, and I felt a bit of system overload where there was just a lot going on with the game at first. and it was harder than it should have been to figure out certain basics, like how to even start a game. But once I got over that initial hump, I started to love this game. It mixes relaxing city builder qualities with cards and randomized relics and power-ups. I had a lot of fun planning my building placements, discovering new buildings, and planning how to use them. In this game, also some great counter RNG measures in place, like giving you a little more control over what types of cards you draw. I am curious if the systems in this game will continue to be fun run after run, but for now, Vertical Kingdom is a top 3 game that I want to play more. And for that reason, I'm absolutely sold on this game and plan to buy it when it comes out. The next game, Super Bullet Break, is a deck builder roguelite where you build a team of bullets to fight enemies and clear bosses. It's basically a card game, but instead of cars, you collect anime girls and cartoon animals. Each bullet or card has both built-in effects and modifiable effects, so you can customize all your bullets and create fun synergies across your deck. The game also draws from gacha games and certain visuals and random effects, but there are and will be no microtransactions. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know what to expect from this game from the description, but I was pleasantly surprised by Super Bullet Break. I really like certain systems in the game, namely the energy system. Instead of the standard card game roguelite, where you play cards on your turn and then enemies do their turns, the cost of your cards changes how soon enemies will attack. Basically, enemies have to wait a certain number of energy units, so playing cards with higher energy costs makes enemies attack sooner. It was a cool mix of deck builder mechanics with mechanics drawn from turn-based tactical games, and I want to play around with those mechanics a lot more. There were also a number of condition effects and synergies that I had fun experimenting with, even in the short demo. The game also had an in-depth story with some surprisingly funny dialogue. I did have some balance complaints with the game in regards to massive difficulty spikes, and there were some minor information and UI problems as well. For example, it took me a while to discover where I could find out what a card or bullet's type was. But as a whole, I had fun with this game, and I want to see more of it in the future. I'm not quite 100% sold yet, but I did add this game to my wishlist, and I plan to actively follow it in its development. Blocky Dungeon is an interesting mix of Tetris and a basic top-down RPG. Instead of normal Tetris pieces, you place new game tiles that have enemies, potions, and other items to interact with. Between placing tiles, you can move your hero around to attack enemies, pick up items, destroy walls, and a lot more. But you only have a set number of actions you can do each turn before you have to recharge by placing a tile or picking up an energy potion. Additionally, you manually clear completed rows in order to create more room for yourself on the map. I like the unique idea behind this game. I think it could end up being a fun game. At the same time though, the gameplay felt incredibly simple. There were some cool combos like getting enemies to attack each other or killing enemies by clearing out the tiles underneath them, but it felt like basic Tetris elements mixed with basic and simple RPG elements. I will say that I only played the endless mode, so maybe the other game modes have more to offer, but from what I played, the core gameplay loop just never hooked me. It never gave me anything to strive for, like an OP build or something like that. This game is definitely unique, and it could end up being a fun but niche roguelite, but nothing about it so far has grabbed my attention because of that simplicity. Unless I learn something new about this game, I don't plan to ever play it again. Now let's talk about Elsie, which I had some mixed feelings about. It's a 2D platformer inspired by Mega Man-like games. You have a basic gun, a dodge, and a parry ability that comes with the counterattack built in as well. You collect upgrades and new abilities as you play through the game, and the build crafting elements seem fun to play around with, but being a demo, I never got super deep into those. Compared to other similar roguelites, this game seemed heavier on platforming, and the combat and gameplay had a more deliberate feel to it. For example, when you parry attacks, you have the ability to counterattack if you correctly time the second parry meter, counterattack meter. I like this extra skill check, but at the same time, sometimes I would successfully counterattack, and the game just didn't do anything. I don't know why that happened. The biggest drawback of this game to me was the gameplay just felt clunky. Compared to a game like Dead Cells, it felt way less responsive and way less smooth. I suspect this might be one of those games where it just takes some getting used to the controls and the game systems, and maybe if I had gotten over that learning curve, it would have been more fun. But this game just never clicked for me. I was also pretty bad at this game, so that likewise limited my enjoyment. So I think there's a potentially cool game here, and I like some of the systems in this game, but it just never came together for me because of that clunky feel. I ended up not adding this game to my wishlist because of that, but I might come back to this game in the future when it fully releases. The next game, Chord, is a team-based deck builder roguelite that plays similarly to turn-based RPGs. You control a band of 4 members, and each character has their own cards and their own relics or self power-ups. You draw all their cards together and use a shared energy pool each turn, so it feels like you're playing with one deck. But it still matters which character is playing which card, because an individual character's buffs or stances will affect the cards being played. Because of that, it adds a nice team management mechanic to the standard card game roguelite formula. And overall, Power Chord just felt good to play. Even from the limited demo, I had some fun combos both between characters and within each individual character. The game also had a fun theme of fighting against demon bands, as well as a rudimentary story. It also gave a nice overview of each enemy type before you fought them for the first time, which gave you a sense of the enemy variety and how to counter individual enemies. The only real flaw with Power Chord that I encountered was how similar the overall game structure felt to most other deck builder roguelites in terms of the overworld, collecting cards, etc., though that team structure still felt fresh. So I was at the Power Chord demo, successfully sold the game to me. It was fun, it felt polished, and it brought a couple novel elements to the genre. Because of that, I plan to buy it and play it more on release. Now I'm going to talk about the last 3 games, and I clustered these games at the end because all 3 of these games gave me performance issues. I do want to note that I'm currently playing on an older gaming laptop instead of my usual desktop PC, and I didn't try that hard to mess around with the game settings, so I don't know how much of this was issues on my end versus the games themselves. And I almost didn't include these games at all, but I decided it was better to include them with this disclaimer. So with that in mind, let's first talk about Roboholic, which is an FPS roguelite that feels inspired by RoboQuest. This game was absolutely unplayable for me, and there were bugs that seemed to be on the game side as opposed to hardware limitations. These included some weird animations and visual artifacts. Additionally, as you can see in this clip, the tutorial completely bugged out on me. And even when the game was running fine, I ran into design issues, like running out of ammo and not being able to find any more. So suffice to say, I think this game just needs more work, and I don't plan to play this one again. Next, Aegis Descent is an FPS game as well, where you play as a mech pilot in an alternative World War II setting. Again, this game gave me a lot of performance issues, but unlike Roboholic, there seemed to be some fun gameplay elements underneath. There was some interesting balancing between movement speed, movement bursts, and needing to slow down or to shoot, but also seemed to be some fun build crafting elements and modification of your mech and abilities. So I want to try this game again, but it was so laggy on my laptop that I quit playing it pretty quickly. I also had some problems with the menus as well, which makes me worried that these performance issues might persist even if I played on my better computer. So I'm not sure what to make of this one, because I would want to try it again on my better computer, but there were enough interesting elements in the game that I ended up adding Aegis Descent to my wishlist. And for the final game in this video, Loopmancer also gave me a lot of performance issues. It's a 2D platformer set in cyberpunk world, and it had a surprising amount of story elements and voice acting. The combat itself revolved around dodging, using a melee and ranged weapon, as well as grenades and other abilities when possible. There were also some basic platforming elements mixed in. I really like the look and the setting of this game, and I want to explore the world more. The combat seemed engaging enough, but because of that lag that I had while playing through it, I never really got into the rhythm of the combat, and I quit playing it pretty quickly. Like Aegis Descent, I want to play this game again on my desktop before I can really judge it. But because there were enough interesting elements there, I added the game to my wishlist, and I plan to follow its development in the future. To wrap things up, that's all of the roguelite demos that I played during the Steam Next Fest. It was fun to try a bunch of random games that I'd never heard of, and it was nice to discover a few new gems that I want to follow. I was pleasantly surprised the number of new games like Loopmancer and Call to the Lamb incorporated some heavy and fleshed out story elements, so I'm excited to see how that pans out in the future. I also love seeing so many new ideas brought to the roguelite space, like Tetris elements, golf elements, and a lot more. So with that in mind, my favorite 4 demos were Curse to Golf, Call to the Lamb, Vertical Kingdom, and Power Chord, and I plan to buy all these games when they release. I most immediately want to play Vertical Kingdom because that demo just really hooked me, but I'm excited to play all of these games more in the future. My next tier down of games was Dome Keeper, Nitro Kid, Super Bullet Break, and maybe potentially Ragtag Crew as well. I had fun with all of these games, and they have some real potential, but they also all had 1 or 2 things that I want to see more of before I fully commit to buying them on release. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if I end up grabbing and buying all of these games eventually anyway. I'm curious if there are any other demos or games that you enjoyed during Steam Next Fest, because I know there are a lot of other big ones that I just didn't have the time to try. Huge shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel, and please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.